Welcome back. This is part 2 of the LCT 87cc engine disassembly. Today we'll be removing the recoil starter assembly and the shroud. So to do that you will need a 10mm socket, an 8mm socket, along with your ratchet, your extension, and your 3/8 to 1/4 inch adapter. So with my 8mm socket, I will remove the 3 bolts on the front of the recoil starter assembly. Remember, when you take the bolts out, as you take them out, set them aside, but when you are done, thread those bolts right back into the shroud so that we don't misplace them or get them confused with other bolts. Set your recoil off to the side. Your next step is to use your 10mm socket to remove the bolts holding the shroud on. We have a bolt here, here. On the bottom there are 2 bolts as well. Before you remove your last bolt, you need to unplug the on-off switch, and that simply just unplugs. Now you can remove the last bolt. Set that off to the side, and once again immediately thread your bolts back into their proper location. Set your shroud off to the side and thread my last 2 bolts in. From here I can see my ignition coil, my flywheel, and these are the cooling fins that are attached to the flywheel. Next step is to remove the nut that holds the flywheel onto the crankshaft. Using your 3/8 ratchet extension and your 18mm socket, we are going to remove this nut. You're going to use a punch and put it inside of here, and you may need to give the nut a good hit in order to get the nut loose. Once it's loose, you can remove the punch, remove the nut, set this off to the side, remove the cooling fin. So we do not damage the threads, we're going to thread the nut back on to the crankshaft, and we will use our 3-jaw puller to pull the flywheel. Your puller should be straight with your flywheel, and remember to keep the nut on the flywheel, and then we're going to tighten up we'll tighten up the puller with my 11/16 socket and ratchet. Be sure you go in the tightening direction, and you may need your partner to hold this, and you're going to tighten it up. And when it feels tight and snug, when the puller feels tight and snug, you want to make sure that it's still straight, everything looks in line with the crankshaft, and if you hit the end of the puller with your dead blow hammer, it should pop loose. Sometimes you may need to tighten it up. And you'll hear a snap. And when you hear that snap, it's typically that means that the flywheel came loose. I can take my nut completely off and remove my flywheel. You want to make sure that the keyway in the flywheel lines up with the key on the crankshaft when you go to assemble your motor. Also, you want to make sure that this key is always in the keyway and doesn't fall out. When I'm all done, I'm going to thread this nut back on the end of the crankshaft and set my flywheel off to the side. So that was removal of the recoil starter assembly. The flywheel and the shroud.